I always forget how long the drive is up to Sleeping Giant until I'm doing it again. Once you get past Thunder Bay, the road gets emptier, and everything starts to feel like it's slipping into another world. I took Highway 587 out to the park entrance, and once I passed the last few signs of town and hit the edge of the forest, it was just me, the trees, and the road. I'd done this sort of thing before, solo hiking and camping trips, but I still got that feeling in my gut every time. That nervous buzz that comes with being completely alone in a place that doesn't care whether or not you're there. No cell service, no houses, no one around for miles. Just woods, rocks, and water. Sleeping Giant had been on my list for a while. Something about the name, the shape of the landmass from above, the cliffs, the trails. I wanted to see it all for myself. I had picked a loop that would take me a few days, starting near the Cabbian Trail and working my way along the shoreline before heading inland and looping back. The forecast looked clear, which was good. Late spring up there could still throw surprises, but I was prepared. I had my tent, sleeping bag, food, stove, water filter, bear canister, flashlight, first aid kit, knife, and extra clothes. I wasn't new to this, but I still checked everything 3 times before leaving the car. It was already mid-afternoon when I hit the trail. The air was damp and cool, the way it gets when a storm recently passed through but didn't stick around. Patches of sun flickered through the tree cover, and the ground was soft but not muddy. I could smell wet earth and pine needles. I didn't see anyone else on the trail, which I preferred. I like my solitude when I'm out here. Still, a tiny part of me always feels better knowing someone else is nearby, even if I never see them. The first few miles were easy. The trail skirted the edge of the forest and then curved in toward the shore. The trees thinned, and I started to see glimpses of the water through breaks in the brush. I passed a couple of rocky clearings that would have made decent campsites, but I had something more specific in mind. I'd seen a little cove marked on the map. Nothing official, but I'd read trip reports from people who said it was a good place to spend a night. Secluded, a small slope down to a pebble beach. I liked the idea of sleeping close enough to hear the waves. By early evening, I found the spot. It wasn't much more than a small clearing with a bit of flat ground near the edge of a steep slope that led down to the lake. The forest wrapped around it on 3 sides, and the trees were dense enough that I couldn't see more than a few yards into them. But it felt safe and it had a view. Nothing between me and the lake but a few bushes and a drop-off. I set my tent near the edge, close enough to hear the water but not close enough to worry about the wind pushing me over in the night. I made camp slowly, not in any rush. I got the tent up, unrolled the sleeping bag, set the bear canister a good distance into the woods, then boiled water for dinner. Dehydrated pasta, just add water. It didn't taste great, but it filled me up. After that, I sat by the slope and watched the sky change. The water below was calm, small waves lapping gently at the rocks. The sun dipped low, casting everything in a soft gold. I tried to let the quiet settle into me, but the first night out is always the worst. No matter how many times I've done this, no matter how confident I feel, it always hits me the same way. The sun goes down, and the woods come alive with sounds. Cracking twigs, leaves rustling, distant splashes. It's probably always like that, but in the dark, every noise feels amplified. And when I'm alone, my brain skips right past squirrel or wind and jumps to something's watching. I tried to relax. I tried to remind myself that most animals didn't want anything to do with me, that I was the loudest, smelliest thing out here and nothing was stalking me. But logic doesn't do much once your adrenaline starts pumping. Inside the tent, I lay on my back and stared at the nylon ceiling, listening. Every time I started to drift off, a noise would snap me awake again. The wind shook the trees above, and I heard something scurry through the brush off to the left. Then a stick broke near the back of the tent, and I jolted upright, heart pounding. I told myself it was just an animal passing through. Nothing big. It was after midnight when I heard the heavier steps. Not constant, not like pacing, just a few crunches of leaves, then silence. Then another crunch. I held my breath. The footsteps weren't close, but they weren't far either. They were measured, intentional, like something was trying not to be loud but wasn't very good at it. Then I heard another crack. twigs snapping under something's weight. I've heard deer before. I've heard moose too. This was different, slower, heavier. I grabbed the flashlight but didn't turn it on. I just held it frozen. The air in the tent felt thin, like I couldn't breathe all the way in. I could feel the pulse in my neck, fast and hard. Then came the crash. It was sudden, loud, and close, like something large had slipped and tumbled down the slope. I heard rocks skittering, branches breaking. Then a deep, heavy thud, followed by what sounded like hoofs scrambling for balance on the pebbles. I waited. My brain was trying to make sense of it, trying to run every possible scenario. Part of me was convinced someone had fallen, or worse, someone was coming for me. I couldn't stay in the tent, not without knowing. My body was buzzing, hands shaking. I flicked on the flashlight, unzipped the door, and shined the beam out through the trees toward the slope. What I saw first was motion, something shifting awkwardly down below near the shoreline. I leaned out and caught a clearer view. An elk. It was big, with thick legs and broad shoulders, its coat dark against the lighter rocks. It was picking itself up from the beach, wobbling a bit, clearly dazed. I kept the light steady, and it turned its head slightly, catching the beam in its eye for a second before it huffed and clambered awkwardly to the side, disappearing down the shore. The rocks clicked under its hooves as it went. I just stood there, crouched in the tent opening, blinking in the light. It had fallen. That was the crash. That was the sound. It must have come through the woods above me, lost its footing, and tumbled down the slope. I couldn't believe something that big had come that close without me knowing until the last second. It explained the heavy steps, the broken twigs, everything. I waited for a few more minutes, flashlight still on, but the only sounds now were the wind and the water. The woods had gone still again. My nerves slowly unwound. I zipped the tent back up, lay down, and finally managed to sleep. In the morning, I went down to the beach. There were fresh marks in the pebbles where the elk had landed, a disturbed patch where it must have rolled, then dragged itself upright. There were broken branches up the slope and a narrow path where it had crashed through the brush. I stood there for a while, looking at it all. It had been less than 30 feet from my tent when it fell. I packed up camp late. I moved slower than usual that day, a little sore from the restless night, a little on edge still. But I kept hiking. The trail carried me inland the next few days, past cliffs and creeks, through thick woods and up steep hills. I didn't see another elk. I didn't see any people either. I finished the loop after 4 days, back at the trailhead, and drove south until my phone picked up a signal again. I had dozens of messages waiting, family and friends checking in, but I didn't answer right away. I just sat in the parking lot, engine off, replaying that first night. Out there, every sound has weight. Every noise becomes a question. You never know what's coming through the dark until it's already arrived. And sometimes, when you finally see what it is, the relief hits you harder than the fear ever did. I didn't die that night, but I learned something. Even when you think you're ready, even when you've done this 100 times, the woods can still surprise you. You're never fully in control. And the first night out is never going to feel normal. But sometimes what sounds like the end of the world is just an elk falling on its ass. And that's enough to keep you humble. I used to spend a lot of my summers out in the woods with a small group of friends. Mostly we were into bouldering, nothing too technical or extreme, just a few of us climbing for fun, testing our strength on the rocks. We had a spot we went to regularly. It was about an hour and a half's drive from where I lived back then. The area was rugged, full of dense woods and winding trails. Not many people went out there, at least not the kind of casual hikers or tourists you'd expect. It was more of a hidden gem, mostly known among climbing circles or local outdoor freaks. We used to camp there, not because we loved sleeping under the stars or anything poetic like that, but mainly to save gas and time. We'd drive in, climb most of the day, maybe cook something lazy over a fire, pass around a bottle, and crash in our tents. Simple. It made sense. This was around the 3rd or 4th time we'd stayed overnight that summer. There were 4 of us on that particular trip. Me, my friend Aaron, and 2 others, Jake and Liv. Erin was probably the most organized among us, always had her gear set just right, neat about packing, even laid out her clothes for the next day sometimes. The night before the weirdness started, we were all tired. We'd spent hours on this one overhang near the eastern tree line, sweating through our shirts, fingers raw from the rock. Erin had said she was just going to leave her gear by her tent. Boots, harness, a light jacket, her rucksack with the chalk bags and stuff. No one thought twice about it. Next morning, I remember waking up to the sound of her unzipping her tent. I could hear her cursing, quiet at first, then louder. I stepped out and saw her pacing around her tent, looking confused, scanning the ground. Her boots were gone. Not just the boots, her bag, some of her clothes, even the chalk powder. All of it, just gone. She swore she'd left it all right outside, not even a foot from the tent flap. At first, we thought she was messing with us or just being forgetful. But Erin wasn't like that. And as we retraced our steps from the night before, we realized we hadn't moved far from the tents after dinner. She hadn't taken the gear anywhere near the boulders. It didn't make sense. Still, none of us wanted to say the word stolen. We didn't want to believe there was someone else out there in those woods, watching us or messing around with our stuff. So we told ourselves that maybe some animal had dragged it off. Maybe raccoons had sniffed out food and taken the bag. Maybe someone camping far off had stumbled on it and thought it was abandoned. We came up with anything we could to make it feel less strange. But deep down, I think we all felt the same uneasy pull in our guts. Something was off. We didn't say it out loud, but it was there, like a splinter you can't quite dig out. That trip ended a day early. Erin was pissed, and I don't blame her. The rest of us tried to laugh it off, told her we'd pitch in to replace what she lost, but it left a weird taste in all our mouths. Still, a year passed. We all moved on, more or less. The summer rolled around again, and like clockwork, we started talking about another trip. We went back to the same spot, the same patch of forest, same little clearing near the stream with the flat ground and the fire pit we'd stacked stones around. Part of us wanted to shake off the weirdness of the last trip, act like it was just bad luck or a weird coincidence. I think we all wanted it to go back to normal. It was a smaller group this time, just me, Jake, and Erin. Liv had moved out of state for work. We brought more gear this time, made sure everything was packed tight. Nothing left outside the tents. We kept things locked in the car when we weren't using them. Erin even brought a whistle and tied a tiny bell to her bag like she'd seen in bear country. The days were good. The climbing felt great. Same rocks we knew, same scrapes on our palms, same aches in our backs at night. We'd sit around the fire, eat quick meals, talk about dumb stuff. Nothing felt strange during the day. But that second night, things shifted again. We'd eaten. It was dark out, pitch black beyond the firelight. No moon that night, or maybe it was hidden behind the clouds. The only light came from the fire and the occasional flicker from our headlamps if someone moved around. We were just sitting, talking lazily. Erin was half asleep, hood pulled up. Jake was poking at the coals with a stick. I got up to take a leak. Didn't want to wander too far, but also didn't want to be right behind the tents. So I stepped past the trees, maybe 20 or 30 feet out, still within earshot if someone called, but dark enough I had to squint. As I stood there, something caught my eye. It was subtle at first, just a shape that didn't quite fit in with the rest of the woods. I thought it was a log at first, something low to the ground, but it didn't look right. The texture was wrong. Too smooth in some places, too broken up in others. I adjusted my eyes. The firelight didn't reach this far, so it was mostly darkness. But something was there, and then I saw it move. Not much, just a shift. A slow adjustment like someone shifting their weight, trying not to make a sound. And then it clicked. It wasn't a log. It was a man in a ghillie suit, laying flat on his stomach, arms tight to his sides. His head tilted just enough that I could tell he was watching our camp, watching us. He must have realized I was staring at him, frozen in place, because the moment our eyes met, he bolted. No noise, just a blur. He sprung up and ran, not toward me, not toward the camp, off into the woods at an angle, fast, silent. I didn't yell, I didn't chase. I just stood there, shaking. When I finally walked back, I didn't know what to say. My heart was thudding in my chest. My mouth was dry. Jake looked up and asked if I was okay. I just nodded, sat down, and stared at the fire. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing things. Branches cracking in the distance, dry leaves shifting. Might have been animals, might not. I didn't know. In the morning, I told them what I'd seen. Aaron went pale. Jake stood there quiet for a long time. No one argued. No one said I was mistaken or imagining things. We packed up and left an hour later. Just grabbed everything and walked it back to the car in silence. No one said a word the whole drive back. We never went back to that spot. None of us. It wasn't just the idea that someone was out there watching us. It was the questions that followed. Was it the same person from the year before? Had they taken Aaron's gear? Were they camped out nearby, living off the land? Or were they just waiting for something, watching to see when we slept, when we were distracted? I've thought about that moment a lot. Not just the sight of the ghillie suit, not just the way he ran, but the fact that he was lying there, in complete silence, in full camouflage, looking right at us. For how long? An hour? 2? All night? What if I hadn't walked out to take a leak? What if we'd all fallen asleep early? I never found out who it was. Never went to the police either. What would I have said? That a guy in a suit was laying down in the woods? It wasn't illegal, just unsettling. But I've read things since. Survivalist forums. Stories about squatters in national forests, people living completely off-grid, watching campsites for gear, food, anything useful. Some people go out into the woods because they want to disappear. Some go out because they enjoy being unseen. It's not supernatural. It's not ghosts. It's not some monster hiding behind a tree. It's just people. And that's what makes it worse. Because people can plan. People can wait. People can learn your patterns. They can crawl through leaves for hours without making a sound. And if they wanted to, they could do more than just watch. That's what I think about even now, all these years later. Not the guy in the ghillie suit, but the fact that he chose not to do anything that night. Because that means he could have. And that's enough to keep me out of those woods for good. I always liked to be alone in the woods. Not for any deep spiritual reason or anything dramatic like that. I just liked the quiet. It helped me think. Helped me feel settled when everything else felt cluttered. I've hiked alone since I was in my late teens, and now, in my early 30s, I still made time for it when I could. Work, bills, the stress of everyday life, all of it kind of just evaporated when I was a few miles deep into a forest. No phone service, no noise, just me, the trail, and the trees. I never used to think much about danger. Sure, I was careful, first aid kit, extra food, water filter, compass and map, emergency beacon if I was really going out far, but danger never felt close. Not real danger. I always thought the things that scared people about hiking alone were either exaggerated or extremely rare. Bears, random weirdos, getting lost. They were things that happened to someone else, not me. That kind of thinking changed after a solo trip I took in early fall a couple years back. I remember the dates exactly because I came back a little different from that one. It was the last weekend of September. Still warm during the day, but the nights dropped into the 40s. Perfect hiking weather, honestly. I had taken Friday and Monday off work, giving myself a nice long weekend. I had just broken up with someone earlier that summer, and I guess I wanted to get away and clear my head, the way I always had. I picked a trail system out in the hills a few hours west. Not totally off the grid, but quiet enough. The kind of place you have to know about. No big parking lot or gift shop. Just a sign near a dirt pull-off, a faded map posted on a weathered board, and the trail disappearing into trees. I'd been there once before a couple years earlier. It was a loop trail about 22 miles in total, cutting through wooded hills, past a lake, up over a ridge, and back down through the forest. If you camped overnight about halfway through, it made a perfect 2-day hike. I planned to do just that, but I gave myself 3 nights so I could take it slow and explore off-trail a little. I had all my gear ready, food portioned out, even printed out weather reports just to be safe. Everything looked perfect. I left early Friday morning. By noon I had parked, signed in on the trail register, slung my pack on, and set off. I remember how quiet it felt almost immediately. That soft kind of quiet that happens when you're miles from traffic, buildings, or people. Just the crunch of boots on packed dirt and the breeze high in the trees. It was cloudy that first day but dry, and the forest was full of those early fall colors. Mostly green, but here and there a burst of red or yellow. I walked for hours without seeing anyone. Honestly, that was the idea. I covered maybe 8 or 9 miles the first day. I set up camp a little off trail, not far from a stream. The area was a bit overgrown, but there was a flat patch of ground tucked between some large boulders that looked like a good spot. Someone had obviously camped there before. Old fire ring, blackened rocks, but it didn't look recent. I pitched my tent, made dinner, and sat watching the last bit of daylight fade behind the trees. The usual woods sounds, bugs, the occasional rustle of something small in the underbrush, owls, started to replace the wind. Sometime around 10 I turned in. It had cooled off a bit, but I was warm enough in my bag. I fell asleep quickly. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, needing to pee. I didn't want to get up at first, but it wasn't going away. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped out. The air was cold and still. No moon, thick cloud cover. I had my headlamp in my hand but didn't turn it on right away. I was used to the dark. After a few seconds my eyes adjusted enough that I could see the shapes of trees and rocks around me. I stepped a few feet away from the tent and took care of business. As I was finishing up, I glanced toward the tree line maybe 20 or 30 feet off. Something about the shape of a patch of brush seemed off. It looked like a person laying down. I just stood there, looking at it for a long moment. My first thought was that I was seeing things. Maybe it was just a log or a weird rock with some fallen branches. I turned my headlamp on and pointed it in that direction. Nothing, just leaves, brush, shadows. Still, it got in my head. I stood there for another minute or so, trying to decide if I was being paranoid or if I had actually seen something. Eventually, I shook it off and went back into the tent. I zipped it up, laid back down, and tried to settle in, but I couldn't shake that image. It had looked just human enough. Arms pulled in, body flat, face turned slightly toward me. I told myself it was probably just a downed log or something. The next day, I got up early and kept moving. I ate, packed, and started hiking by around 8 a.m. It was quiet again, and I kept thinking about that shape in the bushes. I even walked back over to where I thought it had been before I left the site. I didn't see anything unusual, just undergrowth, leaves, and dirt. Still, I couldn't shake it. I told myself again that I was just tired, maybe half asleep when I saw it, but it lingered. The second day, I went about 7 miles, taking my time. I stopped by the lake for lunch, then hiked up toward the ridge. It was steep and a little slow going with the weight on my back, but I made it to a flat stretch not far from the summit. There was a great overlook there, and I decided to make camp nearby since I had plenty of daylight left. I found a nice spot tucked between some trees and a rock wall, a little off trail but not far. Good cover, flat ground, no sign of recent campers. I set up, filtered water, and made dinner as the sun started to set. I was trying to enjoy myself, but the whole day I felt off, like someone was watching me. I kept glancing over my shoulder while I walked, or pausing to listen when I thought I heard movement. But there was never anything. No voices, no footsteps, nothing out of place. I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe I was just on edge after the night before, but deep down something felt wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing small noises, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but they never seemed close. I would lay there, staring up at the roof of the tent, ears straining. Every time I thought I was about to drift off, something would rustle just loudly enough to snap me back awake. At one point, I turned on my headlamp and slowly unzipped the tent, hoping maybe shining it around would put my mind at ease. I didn't see anything, just the trees, the dark, my own breath in the cold air. But right before I zipped it back up, I heard something up the ridge. Not loud, but distinct footsteps. Human footsteps, not animals. Just maybe 3 or 4 slow steps, then silence. I froze. I turned off my light and waited, holding my breath. The sound didn't come back. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, unmoving, listening to the dead quiet around me. Eventually, I zipped the tent back up and laid down, eyes wide open, not even trying to sleep anymore. At first light, I packed everything in a hurry. I didn't make coffee or breakfast. I just wanted to move. I had about 6 miles to go to get back to the trailhead, and I made fast time. My mind was running the whole way. What were those footsteps? Was it just someone else camping up the ridge? But then why were they walking around in the dark, so close to my sight, not saying anything? That didn't sit right. About a mile from the trailhead, I stopped to pee again. I stepped just a few feet off trail behind a tree. As I was finishing up, I looked down and saw something in the dirt. A boot print. Fresh. Not mine. Deeper, wider tread. Someone else had been there very recently. It was pointed uphill, toward where I had come from. That's when I really started to feel uneasy. I didn't see anyone the whole hike. Not a single person. So who left that print? I got back to the car, loaded my gear, and drove straight home without stopping. When I got back, I dumped all my stuff in the garage and went straight to the computer. I opened my browser and started looking up camouflage, hiking dangers, anything that might explain what I saw. That's when I found it, images of ghillie suits. I had never really looked at them before, not closely. I thought they were just for snipers or hunters. But then I saw one laid out flat on the ground, and my stomach dropped. That's what I saw. That first night, that shape in the brush. It was someone in a ghillie suit, laying on their stomach, watching me. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't been half asleep. That was a person. I don't know if it was the same person I heard on the ridge. I don't know if it was one person or more. I don't know what they wanted. But someone was out there, close to me, hiding, watching, and I never heard a word or saw a face. I reported it later, called the ranger station, and told them what I saw. They took a statement but didn't have much to say. No reports of missing people, no suspicious activity. They said they'd checked the area. I never heard back. I haven't hiked alone since. I still go out now and then, but only with friends and never to that part of the state. Something about being watched like that, being close enough to danger without realizing it. I've always liked to hike alone, not in a reckless way. I prepare, I leave detailed plans behind, I check the weather, and I know my limits. There's something about the quiet, the isolation, that clears my head better than anything else. I don't go for popular trails either. If I see too many cars at the trailhead, I just keep driving until I find one that's empty or forgotten. I'm not out there to socialize or to take pictures for the internet. I just want peace and time away from everything. Last fall, I took a trip into the mountains in Northern California, not far from the Oregon border. I won't say the exact area because of what I ran into, but it was deep backcountry, about 30 miles from the nearest town and at least an hour down a gravel road that barely showed up on maps. It wasn't part of a national park, just forest land with no services, no signs, no tourists, the kind of place that still feels untouched. I parked at the end of an unmarked logging road that branched off from an old Forest Service road. I had to maneuver through ruts and fallen branches to even get my truck in there. The trail I found started behind a collapsed wooden fence and went up through thick pine forest. I figured I'd spend 3 nights out there, hiking in about 10 miles to a lake I saw on the topo map, camping there, then circling back in a wide loop. It was one of those hikes where you pack everything on your back, tent, food, stove, everything, and carry it with you. The first day was quiet. Cool weather, overcast sky, air smelling like wet bark and dirt. I saw a couple deer, a few squirrels. No other people. I hiked uphill most of the morning, stopped for lunch near a rocky outcrop with a view of nothing but more forested ridges in every direction. It was exactly what I wanted. No noise, no people, just the sounds of wind in the trees and the crunch of boots on trail. By evening, I reached a small stream and made camp beside it. Nothing strange happened that night. I boiled water for a freeze-dried meal, filtered drinking water, checked my topo map, and crawled into my tent before it got completely dark. I slept fine, though I did hear some distant howls or yips, probably coyotes, around midnight. Normal stuff for the woods. The second day, I kept heading toward the lake, cutting across a ridge and then dropping down into a valley thick with underbrush. There were signs no one had been through in a long time. No trail markers, no boot prints, and down trees across the path that I had to climb over or crawl under. I even lost the trail a few times and had to backtrack. But I like that kind of hiking. It forces you to focus, keeps your head in the present. Mid-afternoon, I passed through a narrow stretch of forest where the pine trees grew very close together. Everything went a bit quieter in there. I'm not talking about anything supernatural. I just mean the way the trees blocked the wind and soaked up the sound. I didn't notice it at first, but I had this growing feeling in my gut, like I was being watched. I kept telling myself it was just because I hadn't seen anyone in a while. It's easy to get paranoid when you're alone for too long. But still, I stopped walking and stood there, listening. Didn't hear anything. No branches snapping, no movement. But something about the place felt off, like it was too still. Even the birds were quiet. I pushed on, ignoring it. About 20 minutes later, I saw something odd. Off to the left, maybe 40 feet from the trail, there was a clearing with rows of small green plants in neat lines. I stopped and stared. At first, I couldn't place what I was looking at. The plants were short, just 2 or 3 feet tall, with jagged leaves. Then it hit me: marijuana. A grow. Pretty big one, too. Maybe a couple hundred plants, tucked away in a remote stretch of forest, far from any road. It wasn't just the plants. I saw black plastic tubing snaking through the undergrowth, irrigation lines, probably running from a water source up the hill. There were stakes in the ground and chicken wire fencing around the grow, partially hidden by camouflage netting. This wasn't some casual operation. It was planned, built, and hidden well. No way this was legal. Not out here. I immediately felt cold all over. I knew what this was. I'd read stories. People stumbling into illegal grows in national forests. Armed growers protecting their crops. Hikers disappearing. This was cartel-level stuff, or at least hardcore local growers who wouldn't want anyone discovering their site. I ducked down behind a fallen log and just stared for a while. I didn't see anyone, but I felt exposed. The place was too quiet, too careful. I had the strong feeling I wasn't the first person to see it and feel that way. I slowly backed away from the area, keeping low and moving as quietly as I could. I had a decision to make: keep going or turn back. If I kept going forward, I might run into more of it. Or worse, the people tending it. If I turned around, I'd be retracing my steps toward the truck, but it would be getting dark soon, and I was at least 10 miles out. I couldn't camp near the grow, that was for sure. I chose a third option: cut off trail. I figured I could make a wide arc around the grow site and get back to the original trail further on. I'd lose some time and it would be slow going through the brush, but it felt safer. I hiked until dusk, staying off any visible trail. I moved downhill toward a small ravine and made camp in a tight cluster of boulders where I could tuck myself in and stay hidden. I didn't light a fire, just ate a cold energy bar, drank some water, and rolled out my sleeping bag without even setting up the tent. I didn't want to draw attention. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing faint sounds. Twigs snapping, maybe animals, maybe not. I had my knife beside me, even though I knew it wouldn't do much if someone was out there with a gun. I just lay there in the dark, listening, breathing slowly, counting the hours until sunrise. At first light, I packed up and kept moving. I was exhausted but focused. I wanted out. I just wanted to get back to my truck. I found a shallow stream and used it to hide my tracks as I hiked, walking in the water when I could. I stayed off trail, using my compass and map to navigate. I figured if I kept north by northwest, I'd eventually cross the forest road again. Around midday, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. A faint drone, like an engine. I froze and listened. It grew louder. A small ATV or dirt bike. I dropped to the ground behind a log and stayed completely still. The sound got closer, then faded. Whoever it was didn't see me, but it confirmed what I already suspected. People were out here and they were mobile. The rest of the day I pushed hard. My legs were sore, my feet were blistered, and I was sweating through my clothes even in the cool mountain air. I kept scanning the trees, kept ducking down at any sound. It felt like the woods were watching me. By evening, I saw the shape of the logging road through the trees. My truck was still half a mile away, but I recognized the bend in the land. I was close, but then I heard something else, voices. Not right near me, but not far off either. Male voices, low, talking fast. Then I saw movement. 2 figures in dark clothes walking along the slope above me, maybe carrying rifles. I couldn't see clearly, but I didn't wait to find out. I stayed low and crawled through the brush. I went downhill, away from them, circling wide again. I didn't get back to the road until it was almost dark. When I finally saw my truck through the trees, parked in the grass and gravel where I left it, I felt a wave of relief, but also a spike of adrenaline. What if someone was waiting there? I stayed hidden and watched for 10 minutes. Nothing moved. Finally, I broke cover and ran. I unlocked the door, started the engine, and backed out fast. The tires spun in the loose dirt, but I got traction and tore out of there. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. I drove straight through the night, back to the highway, back toward civilization. I didn't report it. Maybe I should have. But who would I even report it to? I didn't know the exact location. I didn't want to give my name. I didn't want any trouble. But I haven't hiked alone since. I still think about it. The rows of plants, the irrigation lines, the way the woods went quiet, and those 2 men walking through the trees. They didn't see me, but I saw them, and they were exactly what I feared. They weren't hikers. They weren't hunters. They were protecting something, and I had walked right into it. I've spent a lot of time in the woods. Years. It's the only place that feels right sometimes. I go to get away from work, from phones, from everything that drags at me. I'm not a thrill seeker. I'm not into crazy cliffs or deep caves or running into danger. I'm just someone who likes the quiet and the stretch of trail ahead of me. I know how to prepare, I know how to stay safe, and I don't usually scare easy. But what happened on that trip, what got into my head and stayed there, is something I think about every time I pack a bag now. I wasn't supposed to be there. That much is clear to me now, and someone made damn sure I knew it. It was last September. I'd been looking for a quiet weekend loop somewhere in Northern California, east of Mendocino, but before you hit Redding. Somewhere with some elevation, thick pine forest, and not a lot of traffic. I found a trailhead mentioned in a forgotten forum post, an old logging route that looped down toward a creek, past a couple lakes, and climbed back up along a ridge. Supposedly beautiful, but not on any of the official Forest Service maps anymore. That's what drew me in. I figured I'd see some real quiet country, the kind of hike where maybe you don't see another soul for days. Took a long drive on dirt roads to get there. The last hour was slow and rough. My truck kicked up dust the whole way, and I didn't pass a single other vehicle. No signs, no markers, just occasional old survey flags and faded blazes on trees. When I reached the pull-off, just a wide spot in the dirt with space for maybe 2 vehicles, I parked and sat for a minute. Everything looked untouched. You could hear the breeze in the trees and nothing else. No motors, no birds even. Just that mountain stillness that's both peaceful and a little eerie if you let it sit too long in your head. I started down the trail with a loaded pack. Tent, food for 3 days, water filter, stove, spare clothes, the works. My goal was to do the whole loop over 2 nights, set up by one of the lakes the first night, then camp near the ridge before coming back out. The trail wasn't marked, but it was there. Overgrown in spots, crossed with deadfall, but still walkable. I followed it downhill through tight stands of trees where everything smelled like sap and dirt, past long stretches where the sunlight barely touched the ground. By late afternoon, I reached a clearing near the first lake. The lake was small, still, and ringed with trees. Perfect place to camp. I set up my tent, filtered some water, and cooked dinner on the little stove. Everything was fine. I didn't feel anything wrong then, just tired from the hike and glad to be out there. I turned in early, like I usually do when I'm solo hiking. Nothing to do once the sun drops, no one to talk to. I read a bit by headlamp, then crashed. That first night was fine. Cold, quiet. The second day was when things started to feel strange. I kept on the trail, which twisted through thicker forest now, heading east and then climbing steadily. The air was cooler up high, and I could feel it tighten in my lungs. I passed through an area where the undergrowth was completely cleared, bare dirt and some chopped limbs tossed to the side. That was the first time I paused. It didn't look like a fire had come through. It looked maintained, not natural, but I didn't think too much of it then. Maybe just old forestry work. Later that afternoon, I noticed more odd signs. Black tubing half buried along the edge of the trail. Just here and there, looping off behind trees, almost hidden under the pine needles. Not the kind of stuff hikers leave. Then there were these thin, straight cuts on the trunks of some trees, old but regular, spaced every few dozen yards. I don't know what they were for, but they weren't random. That part of the trail felt off. I can't describe it better than that. It just felt like I shouldn't be there. I told myself I was just tired, reading too much into little details, but my stomach was tense, and I kept checking behind me even though I hadn't seen another person since I left the truck. By the time I reached the second campsite up near the ridge, I was jumpy. The site itself was fine. Flat ground, some rocks to sit on, decent cover, but I couldn't shake that feeling. I skipped making a fire, ate cold food, didn't even unpack all the way. I kept my boots on longer than usual, just in case. I tried to sleep, but the forest was too quiet. It wasn't the usual night quiet either. It was dead. No insects, no wind, no distant animal calls, just stillness, and that stillness kept me awake. Sometime after midnight, I heard movement. Not the light rustle of a raccoon or the distant crack of a branch falling on its own. This was heavy, measured, slow. I held my breath and listened hard. It came from behind my tent, maybe 30 or 40 feet off. Just steps, one at a time, then nothing, then more steps, shifting direction. I sat up, heart pounding, and stayed completely still. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't call out. I didn't make a sound. Whoever or whatever it was, they stayed out there for almost an hour, circling, pausing, letting the silence stretch long enough to make me question whether I'd really heard it. Then more movement, then nothing again. I didn't sleep at all. When light came, I packed up fast. No breakfast, no gear left behind. I just wanted to get moving. I skipped the rest of the loop and aimed straight down the mountain off-trail, using my compass to cut back toward the direction of the road. I didn't want to see what was on the trail ahead. I figured bushwhacking would take longer, but at least I wouldn't be walking right into something I didn't understand. The hike back was hard, steep, tangled. I tore my pants on a jagged stump, slipped twice on wet moss. My shins were bleeding by midday. I still didn't stop. Every time I slowed, I felt like someone was right behind me. Then I heard the noise again. Not footsteps this time, something different. A crack so loud it echoed down the ridge. Then another, like a bat hitting a tree. Then nothing again. I moved faster, pushed through thickets, lost my footing more than once. I didn't care. I just wanted out. Late in the day, I found the road. Not where I left my truck, but close enough. I followed it west, limping, shoulders aching from the pack. I kept my ears open the whole way. Heard an engine once way off, maybe a dirt bike. Never saw it. Just the sound of it, high and thin and gone after a minute. When I reached my truck, the sun was just dipping. I stopped 50 yards short and waited. Looked around. Watched the tree line. It all looked empty, but I didn't trust it. The truck was untouched. I got in, locked the doors, started it up. I didn't stop until I hit cell service, and even then, I didn't call anyone. What would I say? That someone scared me? That I heard noises? But as I drove out, I thought about it more. They knew I was there, probably saw me the day I parked. Maybe from a game cam or a lookout spot. I probably wasn't the first one to hike through there either. Maybe they knew the best way to keep someone from wandering into the wrong patch of forest wasn't a warning sign or confrontation. It was fear. Scare the hiker at night. Let them hear things they can't explain. Let them imagine the worst. That way they won't come back. They'll tell others that the place felt wrong. They'll avoid the whole area. It works better than threats. No one gets caught. No one gets hurt. Just scared enough to stay away. And it worked. I never went back. I never told anyone the exact place. I deleted the GPS track off my phone. I never posted about it. I stayed quiet because I got the message, loud and clear. We didn't pick that spot for any deep reason. It wasn't on a bucket list or known for epic views. It was just remote. That's all we wanted: quiet, space, and distance. My 2 friends and I had taken a week off from work, all of us needing to unplug. The plan was simple: drive deep into the national forest, far enough that there'd be no cell signal and not many other people, park somewhere out of the way, and hike in a few miles to camp. Nothing fancy, just a long break from concrete and noise. The place we stopped was probably about 4 hours from any real town. I remember the road started as pavement but turned to gravel, then dirt. It wasn't a dead end, but it wasn't maintained either. Ruts ran deep in some spots, and we had to take it slow for the last stretch. We passed a couple turnoffs, but they looked more like ATV trails than roads. We picked a wide clearing beside a bend, a natural pull-off with enough room for both of our vehicles. Mine was an older Toyota Tacoma, and my buddy Wes had a dusty gray SUV with just enough clearance to make it without grinding too much. We parked under the trees, ate a late lunch, and loaded our packs. We hiked in maybe 3 miles, just enough to put the road out of earshot. It was late September, still warm in the days, but cold enough at night that you could see your breath after the sun went down. There were no bugs, no crowds, just that dry, quiet stillness you get deep in the woods. Felt good. The first day was nothing. We hiked, made camp, cooked some easy freeze-dried food, and crashed early. The next morning, we pushed another couple of miles up a game trail that followed the slope of a ridge. There were no signs of other people. No boot prints, no trash, not even old fire rings. Just woods and rock and the sound of wind in the trees. Around noon, we found a small outcrop with a view down the valley. We ate lunch there and joked about how disconnected we were. Then we turned back. I noticed something that evening when we returned to camp. Nothing huge, just little things out of place. A small stick leaned against a tree near the trail. A cluster of small stones that weren't there before. I didn't say anything. Maybe it was natural. Maybe I hadn't paid enough attention before. It's easy to project stuff when you're that far out. The second night was when it started to feel off. It wasn't anything dramatic. No howling or footsteps or glowing eyes in the dark. Just unease. Couldn't sleep. Every time I drifted off, I'd wake up to silence. Not peaceful silence. This was the kind that feels like it's holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Around 2 a.m., I sat up in my sleeping bag and just listened. The trees barely moved. The wind had died down. Then I heard it, barely. A dry crack in the distance like a twig underfoot. Not close, but not far enough to ignore. I waited. Nothing else came. Just that one sound. Could have been anything. Deer maybe, but it didn't feel right. I got out of my tent, pulled on my boots, and stood still in the dark. The moon was bright enough to see shapes. The fire had gone out hours ago. I walked over to the tree line and stared into the woods. No movement, but that pressure in my chest wouldn't go away. Eventually, I went back to sleep. The next morning, I didn't mention any of it. I figured it was nerves or just being too deep in my own head. But Wes looked tired too, and I noticed him glancing around more than usual. Our third guy, Matt, didn't say much. He just made coffee and packed up his gear. We planned to do a longer loop that day, heading up the ridge, crossing over a saddle, and coming back around to camp. It was maybe a 6-mile hike total. The higher we climbed, the more it felt like we were in someone else's territory. I know how that sounds, but there were signs. Not obvious ones, no fences or warnings, but small details. A section of trail that had been cleared deliberately. Some brush cut back. A half-buried bucket near a dry stream bed. Plastic sheeting ripped and old. Nothing fresh, but not natural either. None of us said anything. We just kept hiking, but we didn't stop much. No one lingered or took pictures. It was like we were trying to pass through without drawing attention. That night, we made another fire and ate quietly. We didn't talk about anything serious, just surface level stuff. The weather, the food, plans for the next day. But every few minutes, one of us would look toward the woods, like we expected to see someone standing there. It was that kind of night. I didn't sleep again. Around midnight, I heard movement. Real movement. Not the wind. Not animals. Slow, careful steps. Human. No question. I stayed still, barely breathing. The steps circled the camp, just outside the firelight. Then they stopped. For what felt like an hour, nothing moved. I stayed frozen in my bag, listening so hard it hurt. Eventually, the steps moved off. Not rushed, just steady, fading into the woods. I got out of my tent and stayed up till dawn, staring into the trees. We left the next morning. We didn't even eat, just broke down camp and packed fast. Nobody said why. We didn't need to. When we got back to the cars, we stopped cold. Both vehicles had flat tires, but not random flats, one tire each. Rear passenger side, both. The rest looked untouched. No slashes you could see from a distance, just slow leaks. But it wasn't a coincidence. The odds were too perfect. We got the spares on, quietly. No joking, no complaints. We just worked. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting someone to step out of the trees. The spares held, and we drove out slow, no one talking. I watched the tree line the whole way, feeling like we were being followed. When we hit pavement again, I felt like I could finally breathe. We pulled over at a gas station an hour later. None of us even mentioned the tires. We just fueled up, grabbed drinks, and drove our separate ways. I checked my tire later, clean slice in the sidewall, hidden unless you looked up close. Same on Wes's. Razor blade or knife, maybe, but it wasn't some angry drunk or prankster. It was deliberate, planned. Whoever did it wanted us gone, but not stuck, not hurt, just scared enough to leave and not come back. And it worked. Looking back, I think we camped near something we weren't supposed to see. Maybe a grow-op, maybe something else. Whatever it was, we got too close. And they didn't want to deal with us. They just wanted us out. They didn't need to say a word. They didn't need to confront us. They made their point without ever being seen. That's what gets me. We never saw them, but they saw everything. I haven't gone back. I won't. That stretch of forest is off limits in my head now. Not because of stories or legends, but because someone owns that space in a way that goes beyond law. And they don't want visitors. We weren't attacked. We weren't chased. But we were warned. Quietly, clearly. And we listened. We got the hell out. I grew up in Western Canada, so I've spent most of my life surrounded by bears, moose, wolves, and the rest. From an early age, I was taught how to move through the backcountry without making myself prey. I've had bears walk through my camp. I've seen wolves from 50 feet off a trail, and none of it really bothers me. I respect the animals, I stay smart, and that keeps me calm. It wasn't until I went hiking in Australia that I really started to question how relaxed I was about nature. I flew over for a 6-week trip to visit a few Aussie friends I'd met while traveling through Europe. We all liked the outdoors, and a couple of them had grown up exploring the more rugged parts of New South Wales and Queensland. We planned a 10-day backpacking trip through a national park up north. They promised I'd see a different kind of wild, and they weren't lying. From the first day, I could tell this was a different kind of wilderness. Back home, when I hike into the mountains, it's huge and remote, but there's a sense of quiet. You can smell pine, the air is cool and damp, and there's a rhythm to it all. But here, everything buzzed. The air felt dry and electric. The insects never shut up. Birds screamed instead of sang. And it was hot, so much hotter than I was used to. It wasn't just the heat, though. The whole place felt like it was built to cut, sting, or bite. I had a small pack, enough food and water to last 5 days between resupply points, and a tent that could keep out most bugs. My friends, Josh and Mick, seemed totally relaxed. They pointed out funnel web spider holes like someone back home might point out a robin's nest. They walked through tall grass like snakes weren't a thing. I kept thinking how back in Canada, I'd be checking every direction for bears. Here, you had to look down and around and even above. felt like everything was a threat. By day 3, we were deep into the backcountry. The track was more of a faint trail by then, barely visible in places. We were cutting through a section that hadn't seen recent fire. The undergrowth was thick, thorny, and dry. Every step was a gamble on whether something sharp or venomous would make contact with skin. Josh led the way with a machete, slashing enough of a path for us to pass. Mick kept checking the GPS on his old handheld unit, but the coverage was patchy. We made camp late that night near a creek that had mostly dried up but still trickled enough water to filter. The trees here were dense. Everything about the place was different than what I was used to. The way the leaves crunched underfoot, the smell of eucalyptus instead of pine, even the stars looked a little different. I remember lying there that night, sweating in my sleeping bag even with the tent flaps open, trying to relax. That night, something started clawing at the outside of my tent. It wasn't big, probably some kind of marsupial, but it startled me. In Canada, if you heard rustling outside your tent, it could be a bear. You don't just brush that off. Here, it could have been anything, but I had no real instincts for it. The scratching stopped after a minute, and I didn't hear anything else. The next morning, there were small tracks, clawed but not hoofed, around my tent. Possum, maybe. Mick said it could have been a bandicoot. He said it like it was funny. The next day was rough. We had to climb a narrow ridge with loose rock and dense scrub on both sides. We were aiming for a plateau where there was supposed to be an old fire tower we could use for a landmark. By noon, the sun was right above us, and it felt like we were walking through an oven. I ran out of water 2 hours before we found the next creek. I don't think I've ever been that thirsty in my life. My legs cramped up from dehydration, and for a few minutes I just sat there in the dirt, too dizzy to move. We filtered water and set up camp again that night. I was feeling better, but something still didn't sit right. I was starting to notice a pattern. Every time we made camp, I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was camping in an unfamiliar kind of danger. Back home, I knew how to read signs, scat, broken branches, bird activity. Here I was blind. The 5th night is when things went sideways. We were at the base of a gully with steep rock faces on both sides. It looked like a great sheltered place to stop, with a clear water source trickling down from above. We made camp early that day to rest. I remember sitting against a tree, picking the burrs out of my socks, when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The birds weren't screaming anymore. The insects had quieted too. I didn't say anything. I thought maybe I was just tired. I ate my dinner, dehydrated rice and beans, and sat watching the sunlight drain out of the gully. That night, I woke up to movement. Not just rustling, but movement. Steady, deliberate steps on dry leaves and sticks. I sat up slowly, every nerve in my body alert. I didn't hear anything from Mick or Josh's tents. I waited, breathing shallow. The steps circled us. I could feel it more than hear it. Something was moving just outside the ring of tents. I was sure of it. It was too quiet to be a kangaroo. It wasn't skittish. It was methodical. The steps stopped. Then I heard a low, soft exhale. Not close, but not far either. I felt a chill run through my whole body. I stayed like that for over an hour, listening, waiting. Nothing else happened, but I barely slept after that. In the morning, I checked around the camp. There were tracks, deep, clawed impressions in the dry earth. Not hoofed, not pawed, something like a big cat, maybe, but I didn't know what I was looking at. Josh didn't either. Mick shrugged and said it might have been a feral dog, but I knew what dog tracks looked like. These weren't that. We broke camp quickly. None of us said much. The vibe had changed. 2 days later, we reached the old fire tower. It was half collapsed, rusting into the trees, but the views were wide open. We saw no sign of civilization in any direction. It felt like we were on another planet. That night, we camped near the base of the tower. I set up a perimeter with noise traps, just tin cups and sticks, but it made me feel better. Something triggered the traps around 2 a.m. I heard the clink of tin against wood, then silence. No wind, no crickets, just that eerie nothing. Then a second trap went off on the opposite side of camp. That's when I knew it wasn't some animal randomly wandering in. It was testing the edges. It was watching, The next morning, we found the traps tripped, but nothing else. No prints, no blood, just silence. I packed faster than I ever had in my life. The last day of the hike, we made it to the park boundary. I've never been so relieved to see a dirt road in my life. We flagged down a passing truck and hitched a ride to the nearest town. After a shower and a real meal, I sat there thinking about the whole trip. I kept running it over in my head. The tracks, the sounds, the silence. I don't know what we were dealing with out there. Could have been a big cat. Some people say panthers roamed the bush, descended from escaped pets. Maybe a pack of feral dogs. Maybe something else. But I know what I felt: watched, hunted, like I wasn't at the top of the food chain anymore. When I told my Aussie friends back in town about it, they just laughed. Said it was probably nothing. Maybe a boar. Maybe a dingo. They didn't get it. They didn't feel it. But back home, when I go out into the wild now, it feels different. Not worse, just quieter, safer. The way I see it now, Canada's wild wants to be left alone. Australia's wild feels like it's daring you to stay the night. I'll never forget that hike. And I'll never camp in that kind of bush again without a dog, a weapon, and a way out. Sometimes it takes going halfway across the world to realize how different survival can feel, and how fast comfort can turn into fear when the rules change. That trip changed how I think about the outdoors. It reminded me that just because I'm used to wild places doesn't mean I'm ready for all of them. And sometimes the scariest part isn't what you see, it's what knows you're there.